We're back. My Rumble Studio was messing up for like a week and it was driving me insane. I used to just be able to do these from my phone. But anyway, they got it fixed. Actually, Rumble tech support did not let me down in any way. Their reaction time was not bad. Not bad. I mean, whatever. But welcome back to Vince versus everyone. Thank you all very much for coming. Tonight is Wednesday, April 22nd, the worst day to be a Virginian. But yeah, so we'll go through a little bit of that. I mean, so I said, I don't know if anybody here actually watches the TikTok stream. As best I can tell, people on Rumble absolutely hate TikTok just as a concept. But if you have found us via the TikTok stream from last night, I promised. I guessed it on. I nailed it. I predicted it perfectly as soon as the results were reported at the very beginning of the stream. I said nobody's going to accept the results of this, and by tomorrow morning, it's going to be all over X. People saying that it's BS, that the numbers reported are fake, and nobody's going to believe it. It didn't matter if yes or no won because the other side's never going to believe it because that's what we do with elections now. That's just what we do. That's where we are. That is our body politic today. So we passed the referendum, and then the headline is that Republicans cope. Now, here's the difference, right? You'll remember that when Kamala lost the presidential election, it took a little bit. It wasn't like the next day, but I mean, to be fair, I'm not really in that algorithm. But the general thing that we saw is just something's fishy. Like Elon knew too soon. And they shared that clip from Rogan where like Elon got the results from like a couple key districts and just said, that's it, we won. And he's like, dude, there's only 3% reported. And he's like, nah, I already got it. And then Elon leaves, right? And that Rogan clip went around and a bunch of leftists, including like some big names, like, like the Sam Cedars and Klein, they're like, oh man, there really could be something going on. I mean, that seems a little fishy. And that fundamentally is way different than pointing out procedural violations. Those are two totally different things. But it doesn't matter because people show up every 4 years and they have the memory of a goldfish. So they just say, oh, why is it every time Republicans lose, they claim that somebody must have cheated? So anyway, it took no time at all, which is why it was important to me to have this stream, because that's the substantive difference between when Republicans say that there's something fishy and Democrats say there's something fishy, is like that there's some actual substance there, not just like a quote from some guy. So, saying that, oh, well, Trump shouldn't be allowed to run. I mean, just look at January 6th. He just shouldn't be allowed. And it's like, okay, but he was never tried and convicted on like insurrection, which is what it would take if you wanted to like actually remove him from the ballot. So like you can't point to a statute and explain why he shouldn't be allowed to run other than it feels icky, which I guess from that perspective, I can see how it would feel icky. But, the thing is, we don't operate our society off of feelings. We operate our society, oftentimes off of law and order. So when you say something's fishy or like that shouldn't be allowed, that's a little different than saying the referendum clearly violated the Virginia Constitution by introducing it in a special session called the special session, which was called for a budget bill, but then passed in that special session without the necessary 2/3 majority to bring that bill to the floor in a special session, and then leaving that session open for 2 years is a clear violation of the rules. That substantively is a little bit different than, I don't know, man, it just seems a little fishy. But as far as things that do seem a little fishy about last night's election in Virginia, there is the mail-in ballots of it all. And Tactus Grayman goes through this on X if you want to look it up. Just a fun little channel. The share of mail-in ballots that broke for yes is like a statistical impossibility. Like in any random sampling, right? You could expect a relatively close representation of that county. like just any county, if you're taking a random sampling of mail-in ballots from Lexington, you'd expect that it would be within one or two standard deviations of the sum total result of the vote in Lexington. The problem is, if you actually look at the mail-in votes, like by county, by area, they are a nearly 30 standard deviations off from the actual election results. This is like a statistical impossibility. This is like struck by lightning and a meteor during the shark attack. Like in human history, 30 standard deviations is like impossible. It's like Jesus winning the lottery while getting attacked by a shark. It just can't happen. And so you can go through the numbers of that. And then we have the data reporting issue. Jean Leroux on Twitter, he goes through this. And so this data is the discrepancies between the JSON and the data reported. And he goes through it and he points out the JSON, or rather like the live actual reported election results. He's like looking at the ballot counts and then comparing that to the reported ballots as those are being transmitted to like national reporting outlets like NBC or like PolitiFact, those election watch websites. Because in America, we don't actually have a Bureau of Reporting Election Results. We do things a little bit differently, where we just let our news agencies just decide when to call it, and they're not actually part of the government. I guess there's an argument that that's better. Like if the government themselves were fixing the election, then like if they had a department of of calling elections, then it would effectively just become the Department of Fixing Elections. But you look at the lag time between what is in the JSO and the transmitted data, you would think that it would be reported in the JSON, and then after, a refresh period, then you see that get updated on like NBC. You see that reporting update. The thing is, it actually worked in reverse. You would see it update on NBC, and you could actually look at the individual reports where it links back to the JSON data, and the JSON data doesn't keep up. So like you see the number bump up and they say, well, this number is based off of this reporting data. And the reporting data is missing information as effectively. And then you start seeing like totals go a little bit hairy. This happens like 4 times throughout the day at like 9 a.m., 10:30 a.m., again in the afternoon. So it's all like, again, as far as a little fishy, how are you reporting this data before it's transmitted to you? And then why, when it gets transmitted, are these numbers bouncing around all crazy? It's all a little weird. It's just a little strange. And then there's the Fairfax County of it all. Scott Jennings goes through this. And even in the major cities, right? This is what Scott Jennings points out. When you look at the margin of victory in cities like Richmond and Norfolk, while the yes vote is like kind of overwhelming in these bigger cities, which this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody who's ever paid attention to politics or polling at all. If you just look at these major cities, they're winning like 60% of the vote, 65% of the vote. I think even one of them's like 72% of the vote. And like, while that makes sense for these bigger cities, if you get granular and you keep Fairfax's population but split their vote similarly to Richmond or Norfolk, the no vote would have won, right? So follow me here. If you take the major cities, even with their margin of victory, the no vote would have succeeded until you add Fairfax back in. Even if you didn't just remove Fairfax, if you kept Fairfax's population, but made their split more equitable to Richmond or Norfolk, heavy blue areas, it still would not have been enough to get the yes vote across the finish line. They still would have lost. Fairfax is getting 5 representatives out of the 11 in Virginia. 5 of them are coming from Fairfax because of redistricting. And Fairfax won by such a wide margin that their county alone is what secured the yes vote. So you need to understand, even in a city as blue as Richmond, if you took that margin of victory and gave it to Fairfax, meaning you could split the maps any other way, you could pick any other city and make it the epicenter of political power in Virginia, and you would have seen the no vote succeed. But because you give 5 representatives to Fairfax, they win by such a wide margin that nearly half of the representatives for the entire state will come from the only place. You might as well have just had the election in Fairfax. You need not even poll or vote anybody else. That is wild. That is unbelievable. That's your fair maps, ladies and gentlemen. That's the fairness map that everybody voted on yesterday. And in a completely unsurprising development, West Virginia Congress people have already offered their plea to heaven. They're suggesting a vexit, if you will. They're reaching out to the counties in the Shenandoah regions of Virginia that have in their county charters Civil War era bylaws in their charters, and offering them to vote to secede from the state and join West Virginia. These are those 150-year-old laws you always hear about, pie on the windowsill, no strolling in the park on Tuesday, those, or, the cohabitation laws, virtually inactionable. And I guess, we maybe we will get to see how inert they are. And to be honest, you know, my mother's from West Virginia. And I had some pangs of sadness today because I thought, like, maybe if it gets as bad as everyone says, maybe I could convince my wife to go back to my motherland, to go back to West Virginia, a return to Appalachia. And I thought about it, Vance, that's an Appalachia guy. He's in national politics now. Maybe this is the time. And I'm like trying to work myself up. Maybe this is the time. Maybe I can go back to West Virginia. I can create a coalition of like minded, disenfranchised people, and we can create a political movement in West Virginia. And the more I thought about it, the sadder I got because, like, dude, Virginia is my home. Like, these are my people. This is where I'm from. I shouldn't have to leave. Moreover, like, I got a mixed race family. We're not gonna blend in West Virginia, bro. I have a feeling my wife is not gonna go for that. So, like I said, it made me a little sad to think about. Uh, and yeah, so jury's out on that. I haven't even brought it up to her yet. So if you are watching this, right now, you're hearing about this plan before she did. So, I don't think we're gonna do that. At least not to West Virginia. Maybe Arkansas. I've brought up Arkansas, and then like she like kind of dismissed it out of hand, and then like a while later, she's like, I don't know. I mean, Arkansas sounds pretty good. I was like, bruh, I literally okay, whatever. Anyway, so we're gonna find out. We're gonna find out if you gotta go. I almost want to repatriate Virginia. A lot of people have left in the last couple few years. Since COVID, Virginia's bled like all of their most right-leaning people. Like, as close as this vote was, I'm almost remiss to even look up the statistics. Like, if I look up and find out that, like, if we repatriated Virginia with all the people that left in the last couple years, would we have won? Though, I mean, to be honest, you don't even have to live in Virginia to vote in Virginia anymore. So they probably voted anyway. So, like, how could you even know? It's unknowable, as they say. And tonight, even right now, Tim Pool, a person you actually may have heard of, is going through the pending litigation against the election on his show. There's like 4 active cases against the redistricting referendum, some from within the state, and I think 1 national level case as well. Trump sounding off on Truth Social about how crooked it was and this and that. And unfortunately, all of this to say, we're just going to hear about this vote literally for the rest of the year. Like it's going to come up every single primary, every challenge, every midterm election race. They're just going to bring it up. Both sides are going to campaign off of this. We need to win, and because in Virginia they delivered this victory, and we need to hold back the left. Just look at what they did in Virginia. Spanberger ran as a moderate and then crammed through this redistricting, which she promised she wasn't going to do. We're going to hear about this all year. Will they stop it or stall it before the new representatives can be on this ballot? Who knows? We're going to spend the rest of the year finding out, and it's definitely going to boil over. So we're not going to talk about it anymore, at least not tonight. Who knows? Maybe as the cases move forward, as there's actually something to report on, we will talk about it more. As for right now, this Virginian is pretty upset, and I don't know, man. It's just a real bummer. The amount of people, like, it sucks too. Like, I had to look up my own district, right? Like, I had to look up. I was like, please just tell me that I don't. Just please tell me my neighbors are on my side. And I look, and they are, and that made me feel really good. I'm like, okay, but what about mom and dad's district? I looked them up too. Whew, thank God. So it's good to know I'm surrounded by like-minded people, at least when it comes to this. Like, and don't get me wrong, I call it the sign census. Every time there's a local election or a state election or a national election, I do a nice long run around my old hometown, and I just peek at the signs, right? Just see, like, do you got a Kamala sign in your yard? What about state reps? Who's running for town council? Who's got it? And it's fun data. Like, for me, it's just a sign census. I publish it every year on my Facebook page because that's where people who actually know me in real life. That's where they see it. I don't really post politics other than the sign census on my personal page. So it's just a fun thing around the town. And in those national elections, you see more of an equitable split. So it was heartwarming to see, like, when we're talking about actual disenfranchisement. Like, okay, so I know, like, in my hometown, it's probably, if I had to guess, 45% Democrat, 40%, 45% Democrat. It is a more rural area. And, like, so it's always weird to me. It's like, that's weird. Like, everybody seems very conservative here. You wouldn't expect to see so many Kamala signs. You wouldn't expect to see, so many Spanberger signs. But as you do the sign census, you see this split. But when it comes to this issue, this actual hardcore disenfranchisement of Republicans, and then you see like 70-75% are on the no vote side, it's like, wow, like, that is heartwarming. I mean, it sucks that we lost, but it is nice to know that, like, my neighbors think I should have a political voice. And I'm going to assume that the 25% who voted against me are not actually from there and probably just moved there in the last year for the schools and then complained and hopefully are going to leave very soon. And so, anyway, that's enough of that. Uh, on the national stage, we have some great fun news stories, ones that we're not going to talk about for the rest of the year. Or maybe we will. Who knows? It just depends on how good they are. My first and favorite, and it goes back to our previous episodes. I know you think it's the SPLC. It's not. My favorite is the DOJ probing into the beef industry. It's so exciting because we've actually covered this. We've already seen lawsuits on rebar, on PVC, on lumber, on eggs, and now, concrete additives. Don't forget that. All those building materials and some food. Now we're going to see this specifically on the food, on the beef, which is great because, ground beef used to be the cheapest way to get protein, the cheapest, best protein. Now it's like stupidly expensive and also smells like weird, like cardboard most of the time. It smells like a weird combo of, like, I'm trying to remember, like cardboard, or it smells like dust and chlorine. And I don't like that at all. So the DOJ is probing into Tyson Foods, National Beef, Cargill, and JDS. And this lawsuit is shaping up to, basically, it hits all the same beats as the PVC lawsuit. And it's in the very early stages, so I don't want to get over my skis. But I'll give you the short version of the PVC thing, since we already saw how that played out, right? PVC distributors were using this industry newsletter. It's called Opus, OPIS. They were using that to coordinate a price fixing scheme. So this was for PVC distributors to kind of talk about the going rates of PVC and what you could sell it for. And they were funding this newsletter, and then they were using the newsletter to coordinate prices that they would offer to retailers and coordinate what they were willing to pay to the suppliers. So they're playing the game from both ends and then blaming inflation for the higher prices. So they're like strangling the market and like paying less than ever, charging more than ever, and then just saying inflation. And like that was like the whole thing. And they're using this newsletter, and it was like an industry newsletter, right? And so this is for executives. This is, and I say this even about my industry, if you want to know which way the wind is blowing, then you're reading Automation Direct. You're reading like science. You're reading like Science Magazine. You're reading Forbes and Fortune and like all of these different. You need to see which way the wind is blowing, and so you read all this literature. If you're an executive in these particular industries, of course, this is these newsletters that you can skip all that other stuff and just read this. And in many ways, it looks like the beef industry was doing exactly the same thing. They're using forums and elbow rubbing at different conventions so that they could squeeze ranchers. Meanwhile, they're coordinating prices for retailers, and we've seen it go up 20% in 3 years. So their costs get lower, our price gets higher. And they told us it was inflation. And to make matters even worse, like the quality is just the quality's garbage. Like like now, like the Walmart brand stuff is so bad, you like have to get the Purdue Farm stuff. And which means like it didn't just go up 20% in the Walmart brand. Now you're going like you're taking like a 50% jump because you have to buy the name brand stuff because the store brand stuff is just so bad. And all of this was during the presidential election cycle. Affordability was a cornerstone of both campaigns, right? Like egg prices were the main thing at the time, and Kamala laid out her whole plan, which was price controls at the counter, which was hilarious. You guys remember they had the whole table with like the cereal box and the bacon and all the other stuff, and she's like looking at the prices, like, oh, $8 for milk doesn't seem that bad, you know what I mean? But she was talking about price controls, and that was like her big plan was price controls. And thankfully, for as much crap as I give the public school system, they actually did teach us a little bit about price controls. At least they did in my 7th grade, 6th, 7th, 8th grade history classes. 6th and 7th grade. It was Mr. Bucchione. Rest in peace, Mr. Bucchione. Anyway, so they did teach us about price controls and bread lines and how this, basically collapsed in on itself for the Soviets. And so voters kind of rejected this out of hand, even as Trump didn't actually talk about how they were going to lay out. Like, he never laid out his plan. He didn't talk about what his solution was. He just said, like, yo, like, she's talking about price controls. Like, literally anything's better than that. And most voters were like, yeah, okay. Like, and I do say literally most. He won the popular vote. Okay, I guess not most. The plurality of voters. I hate to split hairs here. Anyway, so voters, they said, yeah, we don't go in for price controls. I learned about this in grade school. I can't believe that this woman would even suggest it. And so his plan was affordability and improve wages and reduce retail competition by deporting illegals. That was kind of the best concept of a plan. To borrow a phrase, that was his best concept of a plan that he could offer. But I think it does really say something about the health of our political system that even as this spiraled out of control, it was able to be corrected without a single new piece of legislation. Like, nobody had to pass a law. We didn't need a new department or agents or auditors, none of that. We just literally enforced the laws that we already have. Same with like deportation, same way. Like, they didn't pass any new law. They just enforced the laws that we already had. Anybody could have done this literally at any point. And apparently Trump tried to do this during his first term, and Biden, like, it never got done. I guess he probably thought he was getting reelected, which, shame on him for not just moving as fast as possible. And Biden shut it down. So, like, which is worse, like not moving fast enough or just being like, yeah, we're not doing that. And then your own vice president running on actually doing it. Like, we were enforcing laws we already had. Didn't require some creative solution. It wasn't about the adults being in charge. The adults stopped it from happening. And again, these are laws that we already had. This wasn't some novel concept. Like, trust busting already was a thing. Like robber barons, like we literally did this 100 years ago. And you just do the same thing and you stop them from coordinating like this. And then here's the thing. Here's the thing. I know I didn't really have to sell anybody on any of that, but here's where I start to lose Republicans, where I start to lose conservatives. Because this problem is even bigger and worse than you can imagine. And I don't mean that it gets into the price of all these industries. We're talking about these industry forums that are traded by executives for the purpose of price fixing, right? That's kind of the crux of these DOJ lawsuits in price fixing. These industry forums. Glassdoor literally exists. Every single company is on ZipRecruiter and Indeed advertising exactly what they are paying for positions, every position within their organization. So forget price fixing. What about wage fixing? Don't get me wrong. I understand. Like, I'm a company man. People that I work with would accuse me of being a company man, probably. Like, companies need to make money to survive. Like, there's not like an unlimited ceiling of like you can just make, like, you can just ask for anything and they can just pay it, because there has to be a value prop. Like, because it's not just about like what they charge for me to be on a customer site for a week. Because like with purchasing, that's not how it works. Like, what the money that they make off of my labor has to pay for administrators, and it has to pay for all these different people, project managers, even. Like, there's a lot of different people that need to get paid. Not everybody's in a position that like generates cash necessarily. Not everybody is in sales or service. So between those two departments, you kind of have to you have to you have to put like coal in the engine for everyone, including your purchasers and managers and all these administrators, right? So I get that. But a lot of this stuff is just a shell game. Like, your company rents its building from another company that is owned by your company, right? And like then you've got features like EBITDA or EBITDA, however you say it, whatever. You have these things like EBITDA. So like at the end of the year, when they say, "Oh, like, your bonus is based off of all these things, and one of those things is profitability," like, do you do you trust do you trust them to honestly tell you? Because you would have no way of checking their work. No company has a perfectly open book system. I mean, they might try and be on, oh, well, sales this month and cost and this and that and blah blah blah. But like, if your company's renting its building from itself and it's using, various accounting tricks to determine depreciation and cost of maintenance, how do you know? Like, how do you trust them to be honest with you? And I mean, if you're always getting your full bonus every year, I guess there's really no need to trust, because like they're just giving you the money. But like the first time that you miss, or you don't get your bonus, or you only get a part of your bonus, well, now you have to ask yourself like, well, what's the trust relationship between me and this person, or me and these people? Because there's no way for you to check. And even still, even still, if you were to press them like, well, hey, wait a minute, like, 5 years ago, the rent for the building was, the 30,000 a month. Now you're calculating it at 50,000 a month, and they're, oh well, taxes and land value assessments and blah blah blah. So like, there's no way for you to check reasonably, right? So it comes down to trust. And again, if they're giving you full pop every single time, I guess there's no need to trust. But the first time you miss, then that trust comes into question. So you don't actually know. My point is that even if your company is very open and honest, there's no way for you to know. They tell you, "Oh, we hit a 10% profit. That's our target every year. 8% profit, 10% profit, 8% growth, 10% profit," or whatever. But when it comes down to it and it's time to talk about raises or expansions, more staff so that way you're not having to work a weekend, 2 weekends every month, they say, "Well, there's only 10% left to play with at the top." Well, then this is the problem because now you're forced to look at that graph that the leftists and the Marxists they like to share around, and it shows corporate profits going like this in the 70s, and corporate profits goes up and up and up, and then all of a sudden wages like kind of goes like this, and you see how different those two figures are today. You know the graph. Like you'd be strained when you break that trust, or at least when that trust is called into doubt, that graph comes into the corner of your mind. And when they hire a new guy and he only makes like $3 an hour less than the guy who's worked at the company and is training him and has been around for 10, 12, 15 years, well, now all of a sudden that graph comes back into your mind and you start to understand why that leftist Marxist thing starts to feel really tempting, why it starts to feel really intoxicating. All of a sudden, now that that trust is broken, those people don't really seem so crazy now, do they? That I mean, maybe they're wrong, but they're angry, and you might feel like they're a little righteous in some ways. I mean, just to point this out, 25 years used to get you a pension at like anywhere. I mean, really, you did 25 years, you were getting like a full pension. That is an incredibly valuable prospect. And in some countries, they still do pensions. Now, what do you get at your company if you hit 25 years? Maybe if it's a really nice company, maybe you work, you're a shift lead and you hit 25 years, maybe they get you a Rolex, one of those 10 or $15,000 watches. I mean, that's pretty good. I mean, that's actually really good today, but it's a Rolex, it's a watch. That's not a pension. Maybe you get a paid vacation, all expenses paid. You and your wife, they send you on a cruise, and you go and like you see some place that you never thought you were going to go to. I mean, that is really really nice. That's not a pension. It's not even close. To be honest, in a lot of companies, you'd be incredibly blessed to get like a $5,000 check for 25 years of service. $5,000 for 25 years. That's your thank you. No pension. No pension. Now, if you suggest that you could use the force of government to put the screws in companies that are coordinating to make everything shittier for their own workers, then then you'd be called names. I mean, because this is a prospect that scares a lot of people. If you said no, we're going to create a department and we're going to unionize everyone and unionize all the labor will work together, well then they're going to call you a communist, right? Or if you say, "You know what? Companies that aren't willing to take care of their employees, those companies that aren't willing to take care of their employees that have been with them for 25 years, if they're not willing to take care of them, then maybe the DOJ ought to start investigating those guys." Well, then you'd be called a fascist. In these words, this is a conversation that scares a lot of older people. It makes them uncomfortable because they remember they knew a lot of people who were alive when communists and fascists when they had real political power. Young people today don't have that problem. They don't know anybody who is actually alive to see it. And even to the extent that baby boomers can warn them about these things or they can read about it in a history textbook, they're just too removed from it. They're not afraid to wield the sword of government. And there's no denying that this is about to happen in a big and probably ugly way. Because now that millennials and Gen Z, I mean, these people have reached voting maturity. So they will wield that sort of government and they will take back what they feel was taken from them. And unless the government finds a way to permanently cement their political power and box out outsiders, then this is probably going to look pretty ugly. And if the government does do that, if they do box out the outsiders, if they do try and, from a government level, prevent that kind of change from happening, then the revolution won't be against the employers. You understand? This is a real problem. This is a serious problem. And that's probably the one that's coming next. Now, another fun story, and I know you waited patiently for this. The SPLC. The SPLC indictment, absolutely wild. The number of people that are just diving headfirst into the sand to make sure that they don't have to see anything that looks like a fact, anything that looks like evidence. You cannot risk seeing an ounce of evidence. So we got to dive into the sand headfirst. Already there's people on the right celebrating this victory and laying down the DOJ, laying down some criminal charges. Finally, promises kept. That's two. That makes two just in this episode, just this week in the news. Two promises kept. We're going after the beef, and we got beef with the SPLC. I'd be lying if I said that this doesn't make me at least a little bit hopeful. I would be lying if I didn't say that, but I don't want to get over my skis, right? The SPLC, they were pretty quick to come to their own defense, but not in denial, which anybody who says, if you are on Facebook or if you're talking to somebody and they say, "Oh, it's BS. I don't trust anything out of this government." Okay. You need to point out to them the SPLC has not denied these allegations at all. They confirmed them. They in no uncertain terms, they said, "We absolutely made those payments, but we were doing stings. We were infiltrating these organizations. That's what the money was for. Those payments were to gather information and pay informants like we've been doing for 30 or 40 years." The case made by the DOJ is that this goes well beyond that. That these were not simply payments made to organize, or these were not payments made to informants. These were payments made to leaders, to organizers. The SPLC was directly funding events like the Charlottesville rally, making their own boogeyman so they could go and chase them down. Now, the next question you'll likely get, like, so it is important. You need to stress that fact. You absolutely need to stress it. The SPLC has not denied the allegations. In fact, they confirmed the allegations. They did indeed make these payments. So now we need to know why and to whom and how much and where did that money go? Because if indeed they were paying organizers and leaders, and those leaders were taking those funds to set up these events, to set up the Charlottesville statue rally that ended in a woman dying, then absolutely there's a criminal liability there. The next question that you're going to get is going to be, well, if we are prosecuting the SPLC for making the payments, why aren't we prosecuting the groups that they were paying? And that answer is actually really simple. Defrauding a bank is a felony. So when you do things like, set up an account in a false name or create a fake Soul Corp for the purpose of obscuring ownership of an account. These things are crimes. That is illegal. Defrauding your donors is also illegal. While being a piece of shit is morally wrong, that's not a crime. So that's kind of the difference there. It's actually, I know it's hard to believe, it is not illegal to be a racist piece of shit. It is illegal to go and seek donations claiming that you're going to stop people from being racist pieces of shit, and then you take that money and give it to the racist piece of shit. That's a crime. If you're a 501c3, that's defrauding your donors. Anyway, now, those indoctrinated on the political left, they're quick to say that they don't trust anything out of this government. And from their perspective, that kind of makes sense, right? Trump was running on a revenge kick in 2024. That was the thing. I mean, you guys remember the poster. You remember the picture, right? If this does not go to trial, if this gets dropped before we ever see any evidence, then I will be the first to say this is just BS. This is a smear job. If this does not go in front of a judge to get litigated in the light of day, this will be a victory for the left. And I will be there with the left to say it's bullshit. It was just a hit job, because you have to have the stones to follow through. That was what was promised. That was the promise. Not that you would indict these people. It was that you would get them. So get them, lock them up. If you can't do that, then you can't say promises made, promises kept. That's all I'm saying. This must go in front of a judge. The evidence must be made public. We need to be able to see it, because that is what victory looks like, is that undeniably there must be a chapter in the history books that says this organization, it got co-opted and corrupted, and then Donald Trump put a stop to it. That's how it needs to read. If you're not prepared to take this victory all the way, then it was a mistake. So I guess get ready for it. All right, I'm a little over time. I went a little bit longer than I usually go. I do appreciate anybody who made it this far. If you made it this far, then I guess the message I'm about to deliver, I'm always here for you. I am always here for you. You're not always here for me, but I am definitely always here for you. But you don't need to feel bad. You don't need to feel bad at all. You can make it up to me right now by hitting that follow button, by liking and sharing this video, by subscribing and telling your friends. If you do all of that, there's no need to feel bad, because I forgive you. We'll just call it even. Thank you. Thank you for watching. Thanks for listening.